Hello, beautiful people, and welcome. Hi, to the Genshin Impact 5.3 meta roundup. And boy, do we have things to say. For the first time in a long time, we have a leyline disorder on floor 12. And leyline disorders are a massive deal. As it turns out, characters that can benefit from a free 75% damage bonus tend to overperform a little. And so, because of that, this Abyss is going to have a large discrepancy in terms of how easy it's gonna be, based on whether or not you have the characters that are good in this Abyss. Does that mean that this Abyss is not clearable without those good characters? No, unlike the last Abyss, I managed to do a 4-star only clear in this Abyss, and it wasn't particularly difficult. So in terms of like actual difficulty, I'd say that it is easier, but it'll be a lot easier for people to have the right units. What do we have? Well, the leyline disorder, first half, Pyro damage dealt by all party members' normal attacks is increased by 75%. This does not affect plunge or charge attacks, it's only normal attacks, which means that this is only going to be good on characters that actually want to use their Pyro normal attacks, which is Arlecchino and Yoimiya, and that's it. Second half, all party members' Night Soul Aligned damage increases by 75%, which is above that matters mainly for the teams that use a Natlon carry, so Mawika, Kinich, Molani, and Chaska. But it also matters if you have units like Kachina and Oberon that aren't like your team's carry, but that are still there. That being said though, the DPS requirements for second side are actually pretty low. Like, they're not incredibly low, but they're a lot lower than they often are. Instead of really high DPS requirements, or really high damage requirements, what restricts your teams and what makes specific units good in this Abyss, more so than this leyline disorder, is what the enemies are. But before we look at what the enemies are, we can talk about the blessing. True damage blessings like this don't tend to be all that impactful. They're a nice little upside, and that's kind of it. They're okay. So, what do we have here? Chamber 1, you have 2 waves. Triple Yomkasaur into Mountain King, and then triple Ictomosaurus into Spiritspeaker. Chamber 2, you have triple Xuanwen Beast into Solitary Swanee, and then you have a Tenebrous Mimesis into another one. And then finally, last chamber, you have the Cryo Wyob, followed by a Pyro Construction Mech, and then on the second side, you have Papila Type 3. In terms of just damage requirements, this Abyss is not that bad on Chambers 2 and 3, but it can be pretty rough on Chamber 1. Chamber 1 DPS requirements are pretty high, and if you don't have a team that can benefit from this, or that can break the thingies, the fruit that the Mountain King spawns, and it's not like an incredibly well-invested team, you might find yourself struggling in this chamber more than the other ones. But the biggest, I guess, bottleneck in this Abyss is the Chamber 2. Chamber 2, the Xuanwen Beasts, they don't really matter. They're kind of annoying because they're hard to stagger and they deal a lot of damage. So out of like the mini thingies, they're definitely the harshest ones compared to the Yomkasaurs and the Ictomosaurus. But it's not that bad because they're relatively squishy. But the Swanee can be rough. So Swanee has some mechanics that significantly increases resistance for a pretty like long period of time. So once you get him below a certain HP threshold, he'll finish the current attack he's doing, and then the next attack he'll do will basically start spawning a bunch of hydro currents everywhere. While he's doing that attack, he self-infuses himself with hydro, and his resistances go up to like plus 200% resistances. That's, you stop dealing damage basically. And that attack lasts for a relatively long period of time, so if you don't deal with the mechanic, you lose a lot of time to it. That being said, if you apply Cryo to it and then trigger any reaction, it cancels the attack and it knocks him down. After that, once he's gotten up, he'll do the Anemo special attack, where he spawns 3 orbs that spin around him, and you just have to go apply an element to those orbs. It has to be a swirlable element, so Pyro, Electro, Cryo, Hydro. Hit all 3 of them, and it knocks him down again. The biggest reason why Swanee can be rough is that if you don't have really high DPS, and you don't have a way to deal with the Hydro-related mechanic, you can do it more than once, and you lose so much time because of that. And then, on the second side, what you have is something that is honestly barely a DPS check. These Tenebrous Mimesis guys have 700k HP each. They're really not that tanky. But they have a massive Void Shield. The Void Shield on these is bigger than the Papila Shield. If you played Last Abyss, you have something to compare it to. It's about 50% bigger than the Papila Shield, and you have 2 of them. So basically, you have to get through the equivalent of 3 Papila Shields in this chamber. Then you need to do 700k damage in 1 rotation, because if you need 2 rotations, they're gonna shield back up. 700k damage in a rotation doesn't tend to be difficult to do. At reasonable investment on a reasonable team, it's pretty much trivial. But you need to have a way to break the shield. And because this is the biggest bottleneck chamber, your ability to deal with Void Shields is going to be, honestly, the biggest factor in terms of how easy it is for you to clear this abyss. Now, Void Shields, I've already mentioned in the last Abyss, but we can talk about them again. Void Shields are weird pseudo-elemental shields where instead of the shield going down when you trigger a reaction, it goes down when you hit with an elemental hit. In other words, you can break the shields while bypassing ICD. What you care about isn't a character's elemental application, it's a character's amount of hits. And that's going to make it so that certain characters that don't have amazing application, but do have fast hits, will be a lot better at breaking this shield than they would be at breaking elemental shields. A good example of that is going to be Cookie's Burst. Cookie's Burst has a lot of hits, and so it does a lot of damage to the Mimesis shield. Another example of that is Lanyon's skill. Lanyon's skill, especially at C1, has a lot of hits, because it's got a bunch of Anemo hits and a bunch of infused hits, or absorbed hits, if you absorb on an element. Anyways, we'll get into what units are good at breaking this later. For now, all you have to keep in mind is the DPS requirement on Chamber 2 isn't actually that high. What is rough, what is going to be your bottleneck, is your ability to deal with Void Shields. And then last thing about Void Shields is that Natlan characters are better at breaking Void Shields because their attacks are, I think, 3 times as effective. Then finally, Chamber 3, you have the Biting Cold Wyob manifestation. The main thing to remember for the Wyob, the first attack he's gonna do is gonna be his shield attack. When he shields up, he gains a white shield that is not an elemental shield. It's a shield that's like actually, that works like your shield. It's, you just, in order to break it, you have to deal damage to it. However, when an enemy has a white shield, multiplicative reactions don't work. So Vaporize and Melt don't increase your damage. Other reactions do. That being said, on a high investment team, even the ones that rely on Melt and Vape tend to have enough damage to break the shield in time. Anyways, when it shields up with its white shield, it will yoink all of your energy. But it takes a few seconds to shield up, and so burst-reliant characters, as long as you start the chamber with your burst, can use their burst before he shields up. If you don't break the shield in time, he will transform whatever's left of his white shield into a potentially very tanky Cryo Elemental shield. However, if you do manage to break it in time, he will generate a lot of energy for your whole team. That's basically going to refill your whole team's burst. So you don't get punished for having to use your burst at the start. Anyways, the Wyob himself isn't that tanky once the shield is gone and it's by himself. And then you have a second wave with the construction mech, which is also pretty easy to deal with. And then finally you have Papila, same void shield as the Tenebrous Mimesis, but unlike the Mimesis, you're on a timer with the shield. So the Mimesis shields, they just have the shield until you break it. With Papila, on the other hand, you have a certain amount of time to break it, and if you don't break it in time, Papila will do a wipe attack that's gonna one-shot your character. After the wipe attack, the shield disappears, but Papila gains a large amount of resistances, which means that if you can't break the shield in time, your DPS requirement goes up a lot. So you really should bring a team that can break it in time. So what are the teams that can do these kind of things well? Well, obviously, for the first side, Arlecchino and Yoimiya are going to benefit a lot. Because Yoimiya is really not good in AoE, and the first wave has AoE, she's going to tend to be slower than Arlecchino by a lot more than usual. I wouldn't say that Yoimiya is particularly good this Abyss. Even with that big-ass buff, she's just not strong. Arlecchino is, like, pretty much the strongest character for the first side. She does really well. Obviously, she gets the buff. She can deal with the Yumkasaur, and Arlecchino has very strong melt teams that have a cryo unit that can deal with this one. On top of that, even in those melt teams, she's not that reaction reliant, so the Wyob shield won't be a problem either. What archetypes are worse than usual in this Abyss? The thing that prevents a lot of characters from being good in this Abyss is the Swanee. Swanee has 70% Hydro and Anemo resistance, because Hoyoverse hates you, which means that Hydro and Anemo teams are going to be a lot worse than usual. Now, does that mean that Hydro and Anemo characters aren't playable? No. I'd say that I wouldn't recommend any of the Anemo carries, but Hydro carries, because of Shilonen's existence, and I guess Citlali I get as well, have access to a larger total amount of resistance shred, and resistance shred is a lot more effective against enemies that have high resistance. Obviously, you would still be doing more damage if you shred an enemy that started with less resistances, but if your Hydro team is strong enough and you run enough res shred, the Swanee won't be too much of a problem. I've done a clear with Neuvillette without a problem on the first side, but it'll be a lot worse than usual, which is why both in the Abyss data I collected from my viewers, I only got 3 Neuvillette submissions, and in terms of overall popularity, Neuvillette has dropped a lot. That's just because this Abyss specifically is anti-Neuvillette, and even with that, there's still 50% of Neuvillette havers that are using him. But yeah, so it's a pretty bad Abyss for Neuvillette, but Neuvillette is strong enough that it doesn't really matter that much. Other things that are useful to know, the Spiritspeaker, if you use the charge attack of a character from the Masters of the Night Wind, so Citlali or Auroron, on the Spiritspeaker, it stops moving for like 20 seconds while in its shield phase. So you can kind of just brain off if you put Auroron or Citlali on your second side. On top of that, Auroron is really good at breaking shields because one, well, he himself has a lot of hits, right? His burst has a bunch of hits, and he's Natlan, so all of those hits count triple. But then on top of that, you inherently want to play him in Electro charge teams, which often have other characters that also have a lot of hits. Auroron is played in Taser teams, fuck ton of hits with Fischl, Singto, Farina, whatever animal unit you're using. You got a lot of hits there. In Chaska teams, and Chaska obviously just does a lot by herself, same for like Maoika teams. You also often play him in like Overraid teams or Chivalrous teams. In all of those teams, you end up getting a bunch of hits. And because of that, Auroron is honestly a really, really good character in this Abyss. In any case, what are the characters that can deal with Papila Shield well? Let's go through a bunch of characters and teams. First, we can look at the Pyro characters. Maoika is one of the characters that can clear the Papila Shield by herself in time. There's not that many characters that can do it, Maoika can. So if you put Maoika on your team, whether you're using a Maoika carry team or you're using Maoika as a support, or you're just putting Maoika on your team so she can break the shields, she can take care of the shields by herself. Arlecchino doesn't have the best ways of dealing with a shield, but a lot of her teams have fast off-field app. Her Chivalrous teams use Fischl. If you have C6 Fischl, you should be fine. You don't have C6 Fischl, but you have Auroron, you can use Auroron and you should be fine. If you play her other teams, it can be a little tight on the Vape teams because you just don't really have enough hits, but it's still doable. And then the Melt teams, if you're using Citlali is obviously going to help because she's an Natlan character. She does Night Soul damage. But yeah, they're going to be harder to do, but doable. Gobbing's teams are going to struggle. Linny teams are going to struggle a lot. Yoimiya teams are going to struggle a lot. And if you're going to play Yoimiya, you really should play her on the first side. Like, what are you doing putting her on second side? But they're not going to struggle that much. It's kind of like Arlecchino. Young Fate teams, kind of Hu Tao teams should generally be okay. It's similar to Arlecchino, but a little better. Kali teams should be fine. Diluc teams can struggle. Shelling teams, it depends. If you're using Shelling as your main source of damage, you usually have another fast off-field applier or on-field. You should generally be fine. Molani is like the one Natlan character that sucks at breaking the shield because she just hits way too fucking slow. She still has teams that can break them because you just put Maoika on the team and it's over. But by herself, she struggles more. But yeah, so you can use Maoika, you can use Burn, right? If you're using a Burn Vape Molani team, burning is really good at breaking the shield because all of those burning ticks count as elemental hits. Farina's gonna, like, if you put Farina on the team, she's gonna help a bit. It's gonna be okay, but she's gonna help a lot less than the other off-field Hydro appliers. Neuvillette is okay. By himself, the speed of his hits is, like, pretty okay. But the units he tends to be played with tend to have slower hits. And so, for most people, if you want to play a Neuvillette team on the second side, I would recommend adjusting the rest of your team for those Void Shields. Mainly, should have either Maoika or Auroron. I think if you don't have either of them, you're shooting yourself in the foot. It's not a good Abyss for Nilo. You can still trigger your reactions, so you can still get a bunch of hits from those reactions on your Nilo teams, but it's all single target stuff. Yelan tends to be like the middle ground in hits, obviously. Yelan is gonna help, but he's not enough by herself. You need more than just her. But generally, Yelan plus an on-fielder that has some form of infusion and attacks that aren't too slow should be fine. Yeah. Child is pretty okay. He hits a decent amount, but I don't think he's enough by himself either. Think so, obviously. Very, very good at it. When it comes to Dendro characters, Kaniche is really, really fast. So Kaniche is one of the characters that's going to perform the best on the second side. Emily is only ever played in teams that can trigger burning, which means that it's going to be pretty fast as well. Kirara, meh. Baiju, meh. Nah. Alhaitham is pretty good at it, especially considering that Alhaitham is often played in teams that have a bunch of off-field hits as well. Gaia's meh. Nahida is not particularly good at it. Tiltmedi's okay, because he has a bunch of hits. Kole's okay. Oron is amazing. Chlorine is quite good, right? Like, while she's in her E stance, the E cast is a triple hit. You do N3E spam, and it's 6 hits every time you do N3E, so it's pretty fast. And then on top of that, Chlorine is almost always played with Fischl, which helps a lot. Sethos is meh. Sino is okay. Dory is surprisingly good. Dory's burst has a lot of hits. It's why there was this craze about Child Dory Hyperbloom for a while. Because Dory's burst hits every 0.4 seconds, so it's like really fast. But it has special ICD, so the elemental application is not very fast. Cookie is pretty good at breaking the shield because her burst hits a lot. Obviously, making sure that you're keeping yourself low HP is going to help a lot for your shield breaking as well. Yai is kind of whatever. Raiden is bad at it because her skill doesn't trigger while the shield is up, because her skill's requirement includes dealing damage, and you don't deal damage to enemies that are shielded. Sara is not it. But Zing is okay, and she's often played with Fischl, so generally her teams are going to be fine. Fischl is pretty good, but the difference between Fischl at C6 and without it is pretty big. If you have her C6, she's one of the better off-fielders for Papila, but if you don't, it's probably not enough paired with an on-field elemental applier. You're probably going to need another off-field app on top of her. Beidou's whatever. Razor's meh. Lisa's fine, I guess. Now we get to the Anemo character, and there's actually a lot to say about the Anemo characters. Anemo characters' ability to get elemental absorptions on their abilities often give them a lot more hits. When you're looking at Kazuha's burst, for example, it hits once and then 5 times over time. But if it absorbs something, all of those 5 hits will have an additional hit of that absorbed element. So it goes up to 11 instead of 6. That being said, Kazuha has a character with no ICD on his burst, so he's not the sort of character that overperforms against Papila shields. His application is alright, but his hits are relatively slow. Characters with really fast hits include Venti and Sayu. Lynette is okay, but also, we now have Lanyan. Lanyan's skill at C1 has a bunch more hits and does a lot to Void Shields. And then finally, Chaska has a lot of hits and is an Atlan character, so she's up there with Kaniche as the fastest on-fielders at breaking the shield. For the other Anemo characters, if you're playing on-field Sucrose in like a Taser team, it's fine. Xiao's teams tend to be really bad at dealing with Papila. They don't have great options for it. You can just use Mawika if you want, but like at that point, is it really a Xiao team? And then on the first side, Suanni has 70% Anemo resistance, so yeah. Wanderer teams can be a little bit better in the second side, just because of Wanderer's ability to work with normal attack synergy units. But it's still just whatever. For Cryo units, obviously, Sidlali's pretty good. Keia's meh. Chang'en's bad. Chi-Chi's meh. Erena's bad. Danyu's okay. Rosaria's meh. Ayaka's actually okay. Like, she does a decent chunk of it if you're willing to use your burst on it. Aloy's okay, I guess. Shenhe's fine. Lila's fine. Miga sucks, obviously. Bayuna's meh. Grizzly's meh. Xiaolin is okay, because she applies a bunch of app in a short period of time with her, or a bunch of hits in a short period of time with her burst. And then Geo teams in general don't tend to be very good at it. Xiaolin doesn't help that much, because unless she's in a Moto Geo team, she can only do 2 attacks before she loses her Night Soul. Kachina's okay at it, but like not particularly good. She doesn't have that many hits. None of the off-field Geo have that many hits. And then the on-field Geos are like, okay. But yeah, all in all, the biggest like losers of this abyss are like Xiao, Neuvillette. But even if he's one of the biggest losers of this abyss, he's still good enough that he's very playable. Biggest winners of this abyss are like Arlecchino, Mawika, Laurent, Chaska, Kaniche, Oron. But yeah, so let's go through this abyss and talk about a lot of the a bunch of tips for each of the individual chambers. So, first wave is fairly straightforward. One useful tip to group the first wave here is that if you knock them back with Bennett Burst, the next attack they do, groups them up pretty well. So you don't really have to focus too much on trying to group them. They'll kind of just group themselves. Here, obviously, you got these 3 thingies, and they do a lot of damage, so make sure you dodge them properly. If you have Lanyana in your team, you can walk into the Pyro trail that the Yumkasor King leaves behind after his attack, and that's gonna Pyro infuse your shield when you use your skill, and that's gonna apply Pyro to the enemy, and then you can normal attack it to swirl it onto the thingies. Alright, so even if he doesn't have an element on him, you can apply it with this, and then just do a normal attack, and it breaks all of them. Kind of fucked up my setup, but whatever. Next, you've got these guys. They can fly up if you're not too careful, so be a little careful with it. Take care of the first wave, and then the loser Spiritspeaker is gonna spawn. This enemy's cringe. But yeah. It goes like this, and then you gotta break the Cryo shield. But as I mentioned earlier, all you have to do is this, and then they just get frozen. So you don't have to focus on dodging, and you can just focus on applying your element. I believe that when you trigger this, when you trigger it, it deals damage to all the remaining clones. So you can hold off on using some of them. Sorry, you can make sure that you, like, don't only focus one and kill it before you get the opportunity to refreeze them, because it should take 2 to 3 if you don't have a Pyro unit to break the shield. If you have a team that doesn't have a lot of damage, you might end up letting it re-shield back up. But as long as you have an okay-ish amount of damage, it shouldn't be too much of a problem. Next chamber, you start with these. Like I said earlier, these guys are a little bit more cringe because they actually do a lot of damage. And also they have weird hitboxes, which can be annoying. Oh yeah, and then the Swanee. I'm pretty sure with a start like this, I could kill it before the mechanic starts, but I'm gonna make sure I don't. I'm gonna wait up here. He infused himself with Hydro, starts shooting water everywhere, but you can freeze it and then trigger a reaction.
Bruh.
Oh, okay, that didn't hit, I guess. But you can freeze him and then trigger a reaction to break that. Not what I wanted to do. So here, just a matter of breaking the orbs, and then you're good. Let's show a proper clear. What the heck? And now, we get to the bullshit. These guys go pretty quickly with a team like this. Just know that it's Auron, Fischl, Saint-So putting in a lot of work here. Because these shields are real tanky. Anyways, break the shield pretty fast. And then here, just gonna make sure that you finish with your burst up. Because otherwise, Papila is gonna be rough. And then finally, Wayob. Just try to get the relevant bursts out in time. Which is why I did QE on Citlali instead of EQ. Although I guess I could have just not used Citlali at all, that would have worked too. Let me actually explain what happens when you don't deal with the mechanic properly. Alright, so oh no, I can't use my Citlali burst anymore. And then, oh, I don't have that much, let's say I don't have that much damage, and I can't break the shield in time. Ah, okay. He gets a Cryo Elemental Shield for whatever was left. But that Cryo Elemental Shield is actually pretty, like, if it goes to the full thing, it's actually a pretty damn big shield. So making sure that you break the shield matters, obviously for that, but also so you get your energy back. Otherwise, it's gonna be rough. And finally, we got the Papila. Papila shield is squishier than the Mimesis shields, but if you have a lot of DPS, but you don't have any team that can deal with the shield, you can just go here and wait. You should be out of range of its wipe attack. I don't recommend it. You can also prevent the Wayob from shielding up by stagger locking him or freezing him. The main issue is that stagger locking him for long enough that you can kill him generally won't happen. So it's not really all that doable outside of freeze teams. And freeze teams are really bad for the first two chambers of that side. So it's not really all that worth doing for me. Anyways, Papila shield or Papila, pretty straightforward. So I didn't get my sack proc because I went to Sing So after he shielded up, but whatever. Even with that, like, it's still... But yeah, and then if you don't kill him in time, after having transformed quite a few times, which generally shouldn't be an issue if you're if you're not playing like an actually awful team and you broke the first shield, he'll shield back up. But yeah, that's pretty much it. I honestly really like this Abyss. I understand that there's a lot of cringe with it, but it's nice to finally have an Abyss where the first chamber is like a decent testing ground. Like after the last Abyss, it just feels so much nicer. But yeah, that pretty much does it for the meta roundup. It's really clear that they wanted to sell Mawika, Citlali, and Arlecchino, and I guess to some extent Clement as well. It's getting more and more blatant, so I don't know how to feel about that. Well, that's not true. I know how I feel about that. I don't feel good about it. In any case, I hope you enjoyed. I hope you learned a thing or two. Thanks again to everyone who submitted their runs for the meta roundup submissions. I'll leave a link to the submission in the description, and I will see you guys in the next one. Bye, YouTube.